The Witch is a 2015 folk horror film written and directed by Robert Eggers. Set in 1630s New England, the film tells the story of a Puritan family that is torn apart by the forces of witchcraft, black magic, and religious extremism. Each family member experiences their own terrifying ordeal, exploring diverse themes and fears. The protagonist of the movie is Thomasin, a young teenage girl that becomes the subject of a witch hunt within her own family. In many ways, the movie is a horrific coming-of-age story for Thomasin. In this video, I'll be doing a detailed summary and pointing out some interesting details I found in the movie. I will also be doing an analysis of the themes within the movie, so spoilers ahead. The movie begins with a close-up shot of our protagonist, Thomasin, her face full of trepidation and concern with the proceedings taking place. Her father, William, is at odds with the community and its leaders over religious disputes. The issue has escalated to the point where William is about to be banished. We never get the full story on what William has done, or what the specific issues William has with the community, but their dialogue reveals the contempt William has for the settlement. Here's a quote from William, quote, "Was it not the pure and faithful dispensation of the Gospels and the kingdom of God? I cannot be judged by false Christians, for I have done nothing save preach Christ's true gospel." To which the judges respond, quote, "Must you continue to dishonor the laws of the Commonwealth and the Church with your prideful conceit?" To which William says, "If my conscience sees it fit." As a result, he is banished. I notice here that no one within the community seems especially bothered by this banishment. Most likely, William is not well liked by anyone for his religious extremism, even amongst a Puritan settlement. William, and by association his family, are banned from the settlement. William, still prideful, accepts this decision, saying, quote, "I will be glad of it. How sadly hath the Lord testified against you." The family leaves, but Thomasin is frozen in place. Perhaps she's the only one to truly understand the horrific ramifications of this judgment. Without the settlement or any liberties of trade and aid from the community, the family is almost as good as dead. Caleb, her younger brother, snaps Thomasin out of her frozen state, and she follows her family out the door. The family leaves the settlement on a wagon with all their earthly possessions. I love this shot of the settlement with indigenous people entering the settlement for trade as the gates shut. Her family will not even be granted liberties that the indigenous people have with the settlement. They are truly alone, about to face the wilderness of 1630s North America. After a long trip in the wagon, the family settles in a clearing, surrounded by woodland. For their part, William and his wife Catherine seem happy and at peace with their choice. The family clasped hands in exaltation and prayer. Thank you for their new land and home. The music swells, at first calming and celebratory. But sounds of discord begin to grow louder, with ominous female voices singing, overpowering the initial peaceful atmosphere. The camera zooms into the woods straight ahead, hinting at the lurking danger. This is a wonderful foreshadow, for there is a witch who lives in the woods ahead. The family has unknowingly settled in her territory, and they are now her new prey. More time has passed, and it seems like the family has more or less fully settled. Several structures have been built, with what seems to be more on the way. There is crops growing, and goats can be heard from a distance. The scene cuts to a close-up of Thomasin as she prays. She's asking for God's forgiveness, saying, quote, "I here confess I've lived in sin. I've been idle of my work, disobedient of my parents, neglectful of my prayer. I have in secret played upon thy Sabbath, and broken every one of thy commandments in thought, all the desires of my own will, and not the Holy Spirit. I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life, and everlasting hellfire. But I beg thee, for the sake of thy Son, forgive me. Show me mercy. Show me thy light." I think this prayer reveals so much about Thomasin's life and her family's beliefs. Before their banishment, the family was part of a Puritan colony from England. In the 1630s, English Protestants fled England to escape religious persecution and to live and practice their faith freely. They believed that the Church of England's reform were insufficient, criticizing the Catholic-leaning liturgy, the opulent lifestyles of bishops, and the corruption within ecclesiastical courts. Puritanical beliefs were significantly shaped by Calvinistic theory, which held the belief that God had predestined a select group of individuals known as the elect to receive salvation. Conversely, the rest of humanity was deemed to face eternal damnation. In the Puritan worldview, salvation was not achieved through good works, but rather through faith and a personal relationship with Christ. The Holy Spirit was viewed as the agent of salvation, while conversion was considered a vital indication of spiritual regeneration. However, despite this understanding, Puritans often lived in a state of spiritual anxiety, seeking external signs of God's favor or disapproval. The uncertainty surrounding one's eternal destiny, whether saved or damned, was the constant source of introspection and self-examination. The Puritans were hard-working people who crafted nearly everything they needed in their homes, including their clothing. The men and the boys were responsible for farming, household repairs, and livestock care. Women tended to domestic duties such as cooking, gardening, soap making, and maintaining the home. Puritan society was governed by strict laws that imposed various punishments for crimes such as swearing, excessive alcohol consumption, laziness, and gossip. Even children face dire consequences for disobedience or any actions that can be deemed heretical. Thomason's family is very much the quintessential Puritan family of the time, so much so that they were banished for being too extreme. In the film, Thomason's prayer reflects her concern about her level of obedience. Despite not being particularly disobedient, as evidenced by subsequent scenes where she works diligently alongside her family, Thomason worries about her own desires, potentially impacting her work ethic. This fear of committing sins and facing eternal damnation is a predominant theme throughout the movie, driving the characters to the brink. In a different or more suspicious light, this prayer could also be interpreted as being sinister, hinting at Thomason's potential for wrongdoing. The lines, "I have in secret played upon thy Sabbath, and broken every one of thy commandments in thoughts, all desires of my own, and not the Holy Spirit. I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life and everlasting hellfire," are particularly striking. What would these secret thoughts and desires be that violate every one of God's commandments? While I lean towards the interpretation of Thomason as a typical girl raised in a Puritan society, living in constant fear of God, I find her prayer intriguing. The close-up focus on Thomason alone as she prays for God's mercy suggests that this prayer is a significant point of focus for the filmmakers. And I am very much aware that I am now engaging in my own form of a witch hunt, where now even potential fairly innocuous thoughts and confessions can be seen as witchcraft and evil, seeing signs of the devil at every turn. The irony does not escape me, and regardless of Thomason's innocence or guilt, her prayer marks a turning point for the family, leading to a downward spiral of misfortune and turmoil. Later, Thomason is asked by her mother to look after the youngest family member, baby Samuel. A nice little detail to note is that baby Samuel was not seen with the family during the banishment scene. This hints that Thomason's mother, Catherine, was pregnant with Samuel during that time. William's stubbornness and pride is further evidenced by his willingness to subject his entire family to a life of exile in the wilderness, even while his wife was heavily pregnant. This decision was motivated by his disapproval of the lifestyle choices of those around him, who he deemed insufficiently faithful. As Thomason takes Samuel away, there is a lingering shot of the forest. An ominous voice is heard singing faintly in the background, another foreshadow of the witch lurking nearby. On the ground, Thomason lays Samuel down. Then she engages in a game of peekaboo. They're having a nice time, but upon the fourth boo, Samuel has vanished. Thomasin is shocked and calls after him. She runs towards the woods, but it's too late. Close by, a small leafless shrub can be seen moving, a sign of the witch moving away, invisible to the eye. Deep in the woods, the witch is now visible, hunched over and cloaked. She runs deeper and deeper into the dense forest. Back at her lair, the witch lays Samuel down. It appears that the witch is naked, as the scene is lit by a nearby flame. She runs her hands across Samuel before taking out a knife and seemingly cuts into him. There are further horrific implications as she seems to be holding on to his genitals as she does so, but it is thankfully hard to see from the camera angle and the blur. The witch is then seen more clearly as she stamps something using a makeshift wooden mortar and pestle, the mortar being a hollowed out stump and the pestle being a long wooden staff. A shot can be seen of what she is stamping, and appears to be viscera, the remains of what was once baby Samuel. Later in the night, lit by just the moonlight, the witch lays down on the ground and rubs the gruesome concoction all over her body and on her wooden staff. She begins to intensely shake before she seemingly begins to levitate. Her silhouette is then seen against the full moon as she rises into the air. This appears to be some kind of levitation ritual, so the witch is able to conjure powerful magic using human sacrifices. It is unclear if a baby specifically was needed for such a spell, but the use of Samuel is evidence of the witch's depravity and wickedness. Back at the homestead, the family grieves for the loss of Samuel. Catherine, not surprisingly, is hit hardest. The start of a new day begins with Catherine's sobs. Caleb, Thomasin's younger brother and eldest of the boys, begins to prepare for the day. His attention is diverted to Thomasin as she moans in her sleep. Caleb goes to wake Thomasin, but his gaze lingers on Thomasin's chest. Lust and sexual desire for his sister stirs within him. Thomasin wakes from her troubled sleep to hear her mother's sobs, and her face drops, realizing that the horrible event with Samuel had not been some bad dream. Caleb tells her to go back to sleep and tries to reassure her, saying that all will be well. He continues quietly downstairs. Catherine is heard praying, asking for reassurance from God. Quote, "Send thy Holy Spirit into my heart, which may assure thee that thou art my Father, and I am thy child." This longing and need for reassurance from God is a theme that will continue with Catherine, for her faith is greatly shaken with the loss of Samuel, and she will continue to spiral into further despair. Caleb exits the home and finds his father kneeling in the field. His father makes the decision to call off the search for baby Samuel, reasoning that there was no way Samuel would still be alive after all this time, hinting that a few days have passed since the incident. William asks Caleb to join him in the woods to search for food. Caleb is apprehensive as William and Catherine had forbidden the children from going into the forest. A wise decision, but now out of desperation, William needs Caleb's help in the forest, for their harvest will not be enough to last the winter. Father, son, and dog head out to the forest in search for game. Back at the house, Thomasin listens in on her mother, who remains hidden behind curtains, repeating her prayer over and over again. But there seems to be more of the prayer that can be heard. Quote, "Send thy Holy Spirit into my heart, which may assure thee that thou art my Father, and I am thy child, and that lovest me with that unchangeable love." Catherine is desperate for a sign from God, a sign for his love, but to no avail. A sullen Thomasin goes about her chores. Back in the forest, William and Caleb venture further into the woods. They are now very much in the witch's territory. The angle and scene is framed almost exactly like the same scene where the witch absconds away with baby Samuel. William quizzes his son on the nature of his sin. I find Caleb's answer fascinating, so I will be breaking it down. To note before we begin, there's a back and forth question and answer dialogue between father and son, but I'll be quoting just Caleb in one passage for ease of examination. Here is Caleb's response, quote, "I was conceived in sin and born in iniquity. Adam's sin imputed to me, and a corrupt nature dwelling within me. My corrupt nature is empty of grace, bent onto sin, only onto sin, and that continually." From my understanding, this means that in their belief, all of mankind is born into sin due to Adam's original sin, the act of disobeying God by eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This sin taints mankind and dwells within everyone. It is not something that can be removed. Sin begets sin in a continuous cycle. No one is free of this sin. Father and son check on a nearby trap, only to find it empty. Caleb now questions his father about Samuel, and if he too was born in sin. William affirms that yes, Samuel too was born into sin. But when questioned as to what Samuel's sin could possibly be, William tries to end the conversation. However, Caleb, who is now highly agitated and anxious, pleads for answers. His anxiety is manifesting itself into a series of urgent questions, primarily centering around the possibility of baby Samuel burning in hell, and if he too were to die, will he too be damned for the sins in his heart? For his part, William does try to calm Caleb down. He tells Caleb that he loves him and wishes he could reassure him that Samuel is with Jesus, but that's something that he cannot do. William acknowledges his limitations in understanding these matters, recognizing that only God possesses the knowledge and wisdom to fully comprehend these things. Solemn, but a lot calmer, Caleb remarks on the traps, asking his father where they came from. William admits that he had traded Catherine's silver chalice to passing traders. To William, this was done for the family's survival. His desperation drove him to secretly trade away his wife's dearest possession without her consent. The silver cup holds significant sentimental value for Catherine, serving as a family heirloom passed down from her father. The disappearance of this cherished possession becomes a pivotal plot point, exacerbating tensions and driving the family further apart. Furthermore, in many Christian rituals, silver and gold chalices served as sacred vessels for holding sacramental wine during communion. They are revered as worthy containers entrusted to hold the symbolic representation of the blood of Christ. During significant ceremonies, the loss of this silver cup will come to symbolize Catherine's loss of connection to her own faith. Back at the homestead, Thomasin is gathering eggs. One egg falls, cracking open, to reveal a semi-developed but lifeless chick. This cracked egg is reminiscent of Samuel's tragic fate, a sombering reminder of life's fragility amidst the harsh wilderness. In the unforgiving wilderness, death lurked around every corner, a constant reminder of the fragile balance of existence. This ominous reality casts a shadow over their lives, serving as a foreboding sign of the challenges that lay ahead. An ominous sign indeed that death will come for the family. Returning from examining the traps, William requests Caleb to maintain secrecy regarding Catherine's silver cup. He rationalizes that she is currently too distressed over Samuel's loss, and William resolves to disclose the truth once she recuperates. Fowler, the family dog, alerts the duo to a nearby hare. The hare remains unusually still, observing the pair, but seems to be particularly focused on Caleb. The scene's editing choices, such as close-up of the hare's eye and Caleb's face, seems to suggest this. Eager for game, William and Caleb prepare to kill it, but upon William's shot, the gun seems to malfunction, temporarily blinding him. The shot misses and the hare escapes. My theory on the hare is that it is either the witch in a shape-shifted form, or a familiar of the witch. In European folklore, a familiar is typically a small animal or an imp that acts as a companion or servant to the witch. They were viewed as demonic and malevolent. Whether the witch assumed the shape of a hare or dispatched a familiar to observe the father and son, the scenario is highly revealing. On the surface, William and Caleb appear to be the hunters, pursuing prey. They encounter what seems like an effortless target in the form of the hare. However, appearances can be deceiving. In reality, it is the hare that is actively hunting and manipulating the father and son. The eye contact between Caleb and the hare hints that the hare has indeed found its next victim. Back at the homestead, Thomasin is hard at work while the young twins, Jonas and Mercy, play with the family's black goat named Black Phillip. The twins completely ignore Thomasin's call for them to help her with the chores, and they keep singing a jolly tune. But upon examination of their seemingly innocent lyrics, lurks a dark foreshadow and reveals the truth behind Black Phillip's identity. So I will read out the lyrics of the song. Black Phillip, a crown grows out his head. Black Phillip, to nanny queen is wed. Jump to the fence post, running in the stall. Black Phillip, king of all. Black Phillip, king of sky and land. Black Phillip, king of sea and sand. We are ye servants, we are ye men. Black Phillip eats the lions from the lion's den. Now the line, a crown grows out his head, I think refers to the goat's horns. They symbolize Black Phillip as a significant being befitting a crown, a king of sorts, a ruler to be feared. As for Nanny Queen, I think this refers to a female goat. Nanny goat is a term used for female goats, like how billy goat refers to a male goat. The family does have a nanny goat, so this might just be referring to that goat. But if I was going to wildly speculate, I think this might actually be referring to Thomasin, who acts as the children's nanny, as we see her often taking care of the younger children. So the line nanny queen is wed, I think hints at Black Phillip's plan for Thomasin. He wants to metaphorically or figuratively wed her, so to speak, to make her his new queen, hence nanny queen is wed. The line jump to the fence post, running in the stall is a bit more unclear, but I think this might be a foreshadow of upcoming events regarding a haunting scene where the children are locked in the goat pen with Black Phillip and later the witch. The lines king of all, king of sky and land, and king of sea and sand once again reinforces the idea that Black Phillip is an entity of great power and a ruler of earth. We are ye servants, we are ye men seems to be a pledging of allegiance of sorts from the children to Black Phillip. According to Christian doctrine, the act of worshipping or honoring any other deity other than God is considered sacrilege. The first commandment in the Bible's 10 Commandments explicitly forbids idolatry. Quote, "You shall have no other gods before me." Exodus chapter 20, line 3. Furthermore, the second commandment of the 10 Commandments states, quote, "Thou shalt not make upon thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them nor serve them." Exodus chapter 20, line 4 to 6. I think the lines from the song calling Black Phillip, quote, "king of sky and land and king of sea and sand," is in direct opposition, or at least challenging God's commandment. The last lines of the song are especially interesting. Black Phillip eats the lions from the lion's den. In Judaism and Christianity, the lion is an important religious symbol. In the book of Genesis of the Hebrew Bible, the lion is associated with the tribe of Judah through Jacob's blessing of his fourth son. This association led to the lion becoming a significant symbol in Christianity, as Jesus, a descendant of the house of Judah, is often symbolized by the lion. For Christian believers, this symbolism represents Jesus' return to earth to gather believers. So the line, Black Phillip eating lions from the lion's den, is especially blasphemous. But that is what Black Phillip is doing in a figurative sense. He has come to prey on this Puritan family in their own home in the guise of a black goat. Thomasin, tired of the twins, takes a moment's rest by herself. William and Caleb return to find the twins and Black Phillip running amok. William wrangles Black Phillip back into the goat pen, but not before falling and dirtying his clothes in the mud. Emerging from the house, Catherine immediately directs her ire towards Thomasin, lecturing her and placing the blame for the chaos solely on her shoulders. The tension between them is palpable, and it is evident that Catherine holds a deep disdain for Thomasin, especially after Samuel's abduction. It is clear that Catherine blames Thomasin for that as well. She commands Thomasin to help William with his dirtied clothes, much like she would a common servant. Conversely, Catherine's demeanor to Caleb is soft and gentle, very different from her tone towards Thomasin. Catherine questions William and Caleb about where they have gone. William is intentionally obtuse and vague, not wanting to admit to taking Caleb into the dangerous forest. Wanting to resolve the tension between his parents, Caleb lies to Catherine, saying that they went to look for an apple tree in the woods. He continues, saying that it was William who wanted to find the apples for Catherine to cheer her up, and that he thought he'd seen an apple tree in the forest. Catherine is touched, and the tension dissipates, but she reiterates that she does not want him to stray out into the forest again. Down by the brook, Thomasin goes about cleaning her father's clothes, while Caleb fetches water. Caleb is once again tempted to peek at Thomasin's chest. Thomasin catches him, but doesn't think much of it. She doesn't know that he was looking at her sexually. Caleb hangs his head in shame and becomes sullen. Thomasin splashes water at him playfully and gestures to him to come to her. She cradles him affectionately, showing their closeness and bond. Notice that Thomasin holds him in a very motherly way, rocking him back and forth, and Caleb leans into her embrace completely at ease. This reminds audiences just how young Caleb and Thomasin are. Obviously they are children, but for the time, setting, and culture, a lot of very adult stressors and responsibilities are placed onto Caleb and Thomasin. Both would suffer under this pressure, but this quiet little scene gives a glimpse of how they would be without the pressures of their difficult life. Thomasin expresses her longing for apples. She had not seen an apple since they left England to come to the colony. She playfully mimics biting into his head as if it were an apple, and they jostle and tickle one another. This nice moment is disturbed by rustling close by. One of the twins, Mercy, was crawling and spying. She announces herself as the Witch of the Woods. Mercy rides around on a branch, pretending to be a witch flying through the trees on an enchanted stick. Thomasin confronts Mercy about her bad behavior and sneaking off to the brook alone. Mercy assumes a defiant stance. She asserts her freedom to act as she pleases, claiming that Catherine hates Thomasin and that Black Phillip granted her permission to do so. Mercy holds Thomasin responsible for their inability to visit the brook, as Thomasin's action enabled the witch to abduct baby Samuel. Caleb tries to defend Thomasin, arguing that a wolf must have taken Samuel, but Mercy does not believe that it was a wolf. She insists that she has seen the witch in a riding cloak in the woods. Annoyed and angry, Thomasin decides to scare Mercy, pretending to be that very witch. Caleb does not find it humorous and tries to dissuade Thomasin, but she continues to scare Mercy, saying, quote, "I am that very witch. When I sleep, my spirit slips away from my body and deigns naked with the devil. That's how I signed his book. He bade me bring him an unbaptized babe, so I stole Sam, and I give him to me master, and I'll make any man or thing else vanish I like. Aye, and I'll vanish thee too, if thou displeaseth me. Perchance I'll boil and bake thee, since we're lack of food. How I crave to sink my teeth into thy pink flesh. If ever thou tellest thy mother of this, I'll witch thee and thy mother, and Jonas too." Caleb confronts Thomasin about why she would tell horrible lies. Thomasin dismisses him, telling he could go back to Catherine and William and tell them what she had done, but to leave her be, for she did not want his pity. Now this lie of Thomasin's becomes a much bigger problem for her later in the movie. While this is obviously, to modern audiences, a pretty normal sibling interaction between an angsty teenage girl and an annoying younger sibling, Thomasin's threat is taken very literally and seriously by both Caleb and Mercy. Interestingly, Thomasin's and Mercy's description of the witch is pretty spot on, revealing that amongst the Puritans, there was a fixation and proliferation of the story of witches. Witches were seen as very legitimate threats, just as real as any other threat. Mercy's mimicking and description of this witch also hints that she most likely did see the witch. Black Phillip has also been influencing the twins, encouraging their bad behavior and further sowing chaos amongst the family. Thomasin furthers this divide and ostracization with this threat. This threat also becomes a brilliant foreshadow of things to come in the story. I think this threat also reveals what happens to the twins off-screen much later in the movie, but we will revisit this later in the video. At dinner, the family sits down to pray. Right after the prayer, Catherine begins to accuse Thomasin of taking her silver cup. William and Caleb remain silent, not speaking up for the accused Thomasin. William does try to get Catherine to stop, but he refuses to confess. When Thomasin tells her that she hasn't taken the cup, Catherine refuses to believe her and throws in a verbal jab at Thomasin, asking, quote, "Did a wolf vanish that too?" Catherine then comments on the strangeness of the farm, calling the situation unnatural. A sheep can be heard bleating outside, and Catherine is again irked at Thomasin for not putting the sheep away in their pen. She scolds Thomasin and sends her off to put the sheep away. The twins laugh at Thomasin's scolding as she exits the home. Notice that Catherine never really does any of the chores about the house or the homestead. She just uses Thomasin as a nanny and a servant, yet still hates Thomasin. Catherine leads the charge in ostracizing Thomasin, viewing her eldest daughter as an outsider. William's cowardice and false pride is also on full display, as just moments ago he preaches about sin, yet could not bring himself to tell his wife the truth, allowing all the ire to be directed at his own daughter. Thomasin exits the house and goes to the pen. She finds the hare from earlier watching her as ominous music plays. The hare simply watches Thomasin, once again completely unafraid of humans. Later that night, Catherine prays once again for God's love before bed. William tries to reassure her that God is testing them, and they must remain humble and grateful for his love. But Catherine laments leaving the safety and comfort of the colony. William says, quote, "That damn church? What need we? Silver chalices?" This really angers Catherine, as it was not for vanity that she grieves the loss of her silver chalice, but for its sentimental attachment and its worth. For she even says that the chalice could have been sold so that they can obtain goods to survive the winter. She couldn't have known that William had already traded the chalice for the animal traps. William once again tries to tell her the truth, but Catherine cuts him off, arguing to send Thomasin off to serve another family. Catherine is still resentful of Thomasin for Samuel, and now blames her too for the cup's disappearance. At the same time, I don't think this is a terrible idea, as it would let Thomasin return to the colony and back into society. So while I think that Catherine comes off as an unloving and cold mother at times, I think it mostly stems from a lot of recent tragic events. William, for his part, does not want to send his daughter away, showing that he cares and loves Thomasin. However, as the argument progressively gets more heated, Catherine rightly places the ultimate blame with William and his pride for their situation. It is also revealed during this argument that Catherine wanted to baptize Samuel, but because they were banished, she could not get him baptized. It is unclear if William ever asked for the opportunity to be brought up with the colony, or he just assumed that they would say no to the baptism. Regardless, Catherine believes that Samuel is now burning in hell because he died unbaptized. Catherine also knows that there is no way for the family to survive if this continues. She screams out that they will starve before breaking into sobs. To reassure his wife, William agrees to send Thomasin away to serve another family the next day. Unbeknownst to Catherine and William, the children upstairs are wide awake and have heard everything. Resolute to save his sister and family, Caleb wakes up earlier than usual and makes his way to the barn to fetch the horse. But he is stopped by Thomasin, who questions him. Without revealing his exact plans, Caleb instructs Thomasin to return to bed and act as she had not encountered him. Upon his return, there will be no longer the need to send her away. Thomasin refuses, worried about Caleb. She insists that he take her with him, or she will alert their parents. With no choice, Caleb takes Thomasin on horseback into the woods. He and Thomasin stops by each of the animal traps. Luckily this time, it seems fruitful. On their way home, Thomasin reminisces about their home in England. She recollects on the beautiful glass window, but Caleb does not seem to remember it. Thomasin recounts how Fowler, their dog, would lay in the light that came through their window. One day William caught Fowler lying on the table and joked that they would cook up the dog for food. This was a pleasant memory for Thomasin and shows that the family seemed to have enjoyed a comfortable life back in England. The pleasant recollections come to an abrupt end when the strange hare returns. It blocks the path and scares the horse. With a sudden burst of speed, the hare bolts away, prompting Fowler to give chase. Caleb chases after Fowler, and Bert the horse, still frightful, begins to gallop away. Thomasin loses control of the horse, falls, and is knocked unconscious. Back at the homestead, the family set out to look for Thomasin and Caleb. William enters the woods to look for his children. The day passes by and night begins to fall. Caleb becomes hopelessly lost in the woods, and he begins to pray to God when he hears Fowler nearby in pain. He finds Fowler dying. The dog looks seriously injured, like it was gutted. Caleb makes his way past into the dense woods close by, where he sees the hare. It appears to be injured, limping away. Caleb decides to follow it, unknowingly entering further and further into the witch's domain. Thomasin finally wakes. In the distance, she can hear William's calls for her and Caleb. She's able to follow his voice out of the woods. They embrace, and William, for his part, is relieved to find her. Meanwhile, Caleb wanders deeper into the woods. The hare has led him to a witch's hovel. The witch emerges, taking the form of a beautiful young woman in a red riding cloak. She lifts her skirt to reveal her legs as she approaches him. Her beauty and voluptuous form beguiles her nature, and Caleb is bewitched. He is drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Palpable fear on his face, but he is unable to help himself. She gently touches his face before leaning in for a kiss. Suddenly, with the other arm, she grabs the back of his head violently. Her other arm is revealed to be of an older woman, her true form seen at the beginning of the movie. My theory of why the witch decides to go after Caleb is to further discord in the family. If all went well, Thomasin and Caleb would return to their homestead, and more than likely Thomasin would have still been sent away to serve another family. So to postpone the family's plan to send Thomasin away, further chaos was needed. The seduction and bewitching of Caleb will serve to drive the family into further disarray, chaos, and paranoia. Back at the house, Thomasin is questioned by Catherine why she and Caleb had gone into the woods, but Thomasin refuses to tell her, saying that she promised Caleb not to say. Thomasin is desperate for her mother's affection and favor, but is unable to bring herself to tell the truth, for it will also reveal her father's secret about the silver chalice and the animal traps. William finally admits to taking the silver cup, and fessing up to taking Caleb's into the woods to check on the traps before. Catherine and William leave the house to argue, with Catherine growing more and more desperate and fearful of their situation. William wants to return to the woods to find Caleb, but with no horse, no dog, and no gun, Catherine knows it would be hopeless. Additionally, if William also was to die, the family would be doomed. She strikes him in frustration, to everyone's shock. The strike ends the argument for a time. Thomasin tends to her father's nose. She then asks her mother if the goats have been properly put away. Catherine replies that it hasn't, and Thomasin says that she will do it. However, Catherine tells her not to worry about it due to the rain. Thomasin, wanting to show her mother love and devotion, insists on doing it anyways. Catherine lovingly kisses her forehead and bids her to hurry back. This is a tender moment between Thomasin and her mother, a departure from what we have seen so far. I think this is what the relationship would have been like before the stressors and horrors of recent events. It's also a great juxtaposition to the previous dinner scene in which Catherine sends Thomasin off to put the goats away, but with so much disdain. Once the truth of the silver chalice was revealed, much of Catherine's anger towards Thomasin is released. Unfortunately, this peace won't last long. As Thomasin is putting the goats away, she notices Caleb, who has returned to the homestead. He is nude and shivering in the cold. He's brought upstairs and is tended to by Catherine and Thomasin. They dry him off and tend to his wounds. Then Catherine cuts his temple in an act known as bloodletting. In colonial America, bloodletting was a prevalent practice for treating and preventing illness. It originated from the ancient Greek humoral theory, which theorized that the body consists of 4 fluids of sections requiring equilibrium. Imbalances in these fluids, known as humors, were believed to be the primary cause of most ailments. Bloodletting was seen as a means of purging impure fluids and restoring the body's natural balance, thereby aiding in the healing process. As Caleb struggles to survive, Catherine prays over his body. William, helpless, watches with a sense of futility. To ease the tension and frustration, William steps out to chop wood in the rain. According to the Puritan perspective, hard work and efficiencies serves as expressions of one's faith, carrying a positive moral value. Furthermore, success in one's work is a potential sign of one's salvation. But ultimately, it just shows that there's nothing that William can do. His hard work is futile, and he is no match for the witch or Black Phillip. The next morning, Thomasin and the twins are in the goat's pen. The twins accuse Thomasin of being a witch, saying that Black Phillip told them that she was the one who made Caleb sick by putting the devil in him. Thomasin tells them that she is not the witch, but the twins refuse to believe her. The incident by the brook had fully convinced Mercy and now Jonas that Thomasin is a witch. Even if it was said as a joke, it was now to the twins a fact, and she could no longer convince them otherwise. As Thomasin goes to milk the nanny goat, blood comes out of the udders instead of milk. She kicks it away in fear. Caleb's condition worsens, and Catherine begins to think that there must be some sort of curse, an unnatural ailment that was placed on Caleb by a witch. This is actually the first time that either Catherine or William ever mentions a witch. William decides that they must return to the colony. They will sell everything they can and get Caleb to a doctor, then return to fetch Thomasin and the twins in another trip. Catherine opposes the plan, but when asked what she would have him do, she breaks down into tears, confessing that ultimately she just wishes they were back in their old home in England. She confesses and laments that she has become like Job's wife. The Book of Job holds immense importance within both Judaism and Christianity. When God sought his opinion on Job's faithfulness, Job, a wealthy, devout, and comfortable man with a large family, faced a series of trials orchestrated by the entity known as the accuser. In response to the accuser's assertion that Job would forsake his faith if deprived of his wealth, family, and comfort, God granted the accuser the opportunity to put Job's integrity and unwavering belief to the test. In chapter 2 of the story, during Job's affliction with sores, his wife makes a brief appearance. She urges Job to, quote, curse God and die. Job refuses and endures. In the narrative of Job, readers are invited to contemplate poignant inquiries regarding the origins of suffering, human vulnerability, and the basis for steadfast trust in God, especially in moments when life's tribulations appear unjust. Job's wife is generally not seen favorably by many in the story, but just as Job is put through the trials, she too loses everything, including all of their children. Catherine here compares herself to Job's wife. She feels like they're being punished and tested by God, and like Job's wife, she can no longer bear it. She confesses to William that she no longer feels the love of Christ. She recounts how when she was close to Thomason's age, she had a dream where she was with Christ on earth. She felt rapturous with his love. However, after Samuel's disappearance, she can no longer feel that connection. Comparing herself to Job's wife and saying she no longer feels a connection to God is quite a powerful statement. She is essentially confessing that she has given up her faith in God here. Puritans feel very strongly about having a strong sense and personal connection to God. A covenant with God was needed for salvation and redemption of their sins. The admission that she no longer felt connected to Christ is a very profound statement and not to be taken lightly. William returns to the field to salvage as much of the crops before the trip back to the colony. As the family works to prepare the crops, Mercy begins to sing another song about Black Philip. Black Philip is a merry, merry king. He rules the land with mirth. Black Philip has a mighty, mighty sting. He'll knock thee to the earth. Sing ba ba, King Philip the Black. Sing ba 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 ba. Sing ba ba, King Philip the Black, he'll knock thee on thy back. I'm not sure if this is a completely new song or if it's a continuation of the first song, but it seems to continue the theme of Black Philip being a powerful king. Here he is described as a merry king that rules with mirth. I think this foreshadows the ending of the movie and ultimately the deal he makes with Thomason, so I won't dwell on it here. The lines, he'll knock thee to the earth, and he'll knock thee on thy back is also of interest, for it hints that Black Philip is a dangerous or a physical threat, which again foreshadows the ending of the film where Black Philip kills William by knocking him on his back. Just as Mercy finishes her song, a loud scream can be heard from the house. The family rushes upstairs to find Caleb in a state of hysteria. He says, quote, "Get the broad axe, he'll cut off her head. Get the narrow axe, he'll cut off her head. Get the broad axe, he'll cut off her head. Get the narrow axe, he'll cut off her head. She's upon me. She kneels. My bowels. My stomach. She pinches. Sin. 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 Sin." This agonizing cry from Caleb is fascinating, so I'll take a moment to really dig in, because this seems to be a reference to a real-world incident that was recorded in 1662, during an incident known as the Hartford Witch Panic. The panic was set off with the death of an 8-year-old girl named Elizabeth Kelly, whose parents firmly believed that their neighbor, a woman named Goody Ayers, had employed witchcraft, resulting in the untimely death of their daughter. If you're interested in this story, I will highly recommend that you go read it for yourself. On March 23, 1662, Elizabeth Kelly succumbed to an illness that is now believed to be bronchial pneumonia. Days prior, she had been in good health. However, the following day, when Ayers visited the Kelly household and shared a bowl of broth with Elizabeth, a drastic change occurred. That night, Elizabeth became severely ill. For the next 5 days, she endured prolonged stomach pains and experienced delusions, going as far as to accuse Goodwife Ayers of causing her pain. Elizabeth's parents would later testify that during their daughter's illness, she had exclaimed, quote, "Father, Father, help me, help me. Goodwife Ayers is upon me. She chokes me, she kneels on my belly. She will break my bowels. She pinches me. She will make me black and blue. Goodwife Ayers torments me. She pricks me with pins. She will kill me. O Father, set on the great furnace and scald her. Get the broad axe and cut off her head. The mention of Elizabeth Kelly establishes additional links to accurate historical accounts of the witch trials. These accounts reflect the genuine fear that people had of witches during the 17th century. Additionally, this scene serves as a clever reference to the onset of a witch trial targeting Thomasin. This crucial moment marks the beginning of Thomasin's witch trial. As the family fully begins to turn on one another, Caleb suddenly clenches up, his jaws locked. In desperation, William pries it open with the handle of his knife. A small but intact apple was lodged in his mouth. Caleb is able to spit it out. Catherine calls it a sign of a witch. The twins run in fear to her and accuse Thomasin of being a witch. They tell William and Catherine about what Thomasin said that day by the brook, and about how the goat's milk had turned to blood. They also say that she bargained with Satan and signed his book. In the film, the apple may symbolize the lie Caleb told about seeing the apple tree earlier. In the Christian narrative of Adam and Eve, the apple holds deep symbolic significance. Traditional Christian teaching asserts that the original sin stemmed from Adam and Eve's disobedience to God by consuming the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. The doctrine of original sin explores the repercussions of Adam's actions on humanity, encompassing their intrinsic nature and relationship with God. This doctrine is rooted in biblical accounts, suggests that Adam passed on his sin and guilt through his descendants. Caleb and William discussed this very doctrine as they ventured in the woods. Caleb in many ways seemed to represent Adam in the story. He too was tempted by the witch, by her beauty and sensuality. In a figurative sense, he too went to taste a forbidden fruit and was cursed from it. It is heavily implied that Caleb suffered from an attack of a sexual nature by the witch, i.e. the violent kiss and nudity upon his return. The apple he ejects from his mouth is also partially decayed or flawed. It could symbolize the witch's deceptive beauty, which lured him in. The twins also mention that Thomasin made a bargain with Satan and signed her name in his book. This is another reference to real-world beliefs during the witch trials. The concept of signing a devil's book likely originated from the Puritan belief that church members entered into a covenant with God. This covenant was physically manifested through the act of signing a church membership book, signifying their commitment and dedication to their faith. In contrast, witches were believed to have signed their names in the devil's book using either pen or ink from their own blood. According to the beliefs of the time, this act of signing was necessary for a person to become a true witch and gain demonic powers. William, for his part, refuses to believe the twins and commands them that they all pray over Caleb. Everyone begins to pray except for the twins, who say they cannot remember their prayers. Both Jonas and Mercy seem to be experiencing pain in their abdominal areas. They clutch at their bellies and fall over. Thomasin is frustrated and angry at the twins, but her shouts and panic just add to the chaos. Thomasin is desperate that they all are able to pray here because it would help prove her innocence. During the infamous Salem witch trials, the accused individuals often underwent a peculiar test involving the recitation of the Lord's Prayer. This test was based on the medieval belief that witches could not speak scripture aloud. Any mistakes made during the recitation were interpreted as conclusive evidence of a pact with the devil. In the homestead, William and Catherine hold the reins of control, embodying the law and power. The twins introduced the notion that Thomasin might be a witch, casting doubt on her innocence. Thomasin faces dire consequences if she is branded a witch. The potential retribution includes severe punishments, even death, if her parents deemed it necessary. The movie cleverly creates a microcosm of a colonial Puritan society during a witch hunt. Caleb suddenly takes a deep gasp before shouting out, quote, "It's her, a cat, a crow, a raven, a great black dog, a wolf. She desires of my blood. She sends them upon me." In unison, the twins also shout out, "She desires of my blood." Caleb continues, quote, "She sets them upon me. My Lord, my Jesus, save me. She sends devils. I am thine enemy, wallowing in the blood and filth of my sins. I am thine enemy, for thou art with me." Catherine, William, and Thomason can only pray in a circle as they watch in horror as Caleb suffers. He momentarily seems to snap out of his manic shouting and regains his wits. But he then begins again, this time with a sense of euphoria. He says, quote, "Cast the light of countenance upon me. Spread her for me, the lap of thy love. Wash me in the ever-flowing fountains of thy blood. Wholly thine, I am, my sweet Lord Jesus, my Lord, my love. Kiss me with the kisses of thy mouth. How lovely art thou, thy embrace, my Lord, my Lord, my love, my soul's salvation. Take me to thy lap." He begins to moan in pleasure and delight before his breathing stills, and he passes. This is a lot, so let's break it down. In the beginning of his second soliloquy, Caleb seems to be scared of the witch. The her he mentions, I believe, is the witch he encountered in the woods. He also lists out some animals, a cat, a crow, a raven, a black dog, and a wolf. I think this is hinting at her ability to change forms, or he is listing out her different familiars. Caleb is terrified of the witch and believes that she has sent devils to torment him. He laments that he is wallowing in blood and filth for his sins. I think this hints to what the witch had done to him. Her attack upon him is very sexually coded and violent, so Caleb believes he is tainted by this. Along with Puritan beliefs that all of humanity is still tainted by Adam's first and original sin, it is not surprising that Caleb is terrified for his eternal soul. In the second part, he seems to be overcome with euphoria, as if he feels Jesus' love, but how Caleb expresses his love is very intimate and very romantic and sensual, which is quite unsettling for a child to do so. His expression of love for Jesus reminds me almost like a Shakespearean play, where one character would profess their undying love for another. It's very theatrical, a performance of a good death. Like the first part of his soliloquy, this last part of Caleb's deathbed speech also seems to have been inspired by real-world recollections. Ars Moriendi, or The Art of Dying, are two Latin texts that offer advice on Christian precepts for a good death in the Middle Ages. During the 15th century in England, the Ars Moriendi materialized into the book titled The Book of the Craft of Dying, which gained significant popularity among lay people. This book heavily influenced common Londoners' perceptions and understandings of death, particularly the concept of what is called the good death. For a death to be considered good, it required an audience to witness it, enhancing its inherent dramatic quality. In the face of death, a protracted and agonizing demise by disease was deemed undesirable. However, it was believed that a peaceful and courageous acceptance of the inevitable pain could transform what is a bad death into a good one. Delirium during the final moments was also undesirable. Loud, fearful, and vocal expressions of distress did not align with the prevailing narrative of a peaceful transition into the afterlife. Furthermore, delirium on the deathbed raised concerns about demonic possession, indicating an unfavorable destination for the departing soul. Now that Caleb is dead, Thomason becomes the main target for blame. Catherine angrily shouts at her to get away from Caleb, and Thomason flees the house. William runs after Thomasin, and he's able to catch her. He holds her and comforts her, but soon his tone turns accusatory. Like Catherine, he had already made up his mind that she is a witch, and he tries to get her to confess. He tells her that a council will be called, and while he does not finish his sentence, it is implied that her life will be in danger. He urges her to tell the truth so that she could be saved. Thomasin is desperate and pleads that she is innocent, but William does not believe her. Angry and hurt, Thomasin lashes out at her father, calling him a hypocrite and a liar. Thomasin points out that it was William who lied about taking Caleb to the woods, and that he was the one who took Catherine's cup, letting Thomasin take the blame for it all this time. She also confronts him about wanting to be rid of her, and to add to insult, she angrily yells at him for his inability to provide for his family, saying that all he can do is cut wood. In anger, he yells at her and pushes her to the ground, saying, quote, "Must I hear the devil wag his tongue in thy mouth?" Again, we see when Thomasin tries to defend herself, any defense she takes is just more evidence that is used against her. William sees his daughter now as an agent of the devil, and there really isn't any other way to convince him otherwise. She urges him to ask about the twins and their strange bond to Black Philip, and how the twins spend their days talking to the goat. Thomasin says, quote, "The adversary oft comes in the shape of a he-goat, and whispers, aye, whispers. He is Lucifer, you know it. The twins know it too. It was they. 'Twas they and that goat that bewitched this whole farm. Was the wolf Stosan? I never saw no wolf. Mercy told me herself by the stream. I be the witch of the wood." The symbolism and idea that goats are signs of evil and the devil in Christianity has many historical roots. In Christianity, sheep represent the devout followers of Christ, in contrast to goats, which symbolize those who rejected his teachings and chose not to follow him. In Matthew chapter 25, line 43, in the story known as the sheep and the goats, Jesus separates the sheep to his right and the goats to his left. Quote, "Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.'" Another example of goats in the Bible is of the scapegoat, representing one of two goats. Through a ritualistic act, one goat is released into the wilderness, carrying with it the accumulated sins and impurities of the community. Simultaneously, the other goat is sacrificed as an offspring. The concept of the scapegoat initially emerges in the book of Leviticus, where a goat is specifically chosen to be cast into the desert, symbolizing the removal of the community's sins, hence the association of goats to sin. Furthermore, Christian antipathy and suspicion towards goat may also originate from ancient Greek mythology. Christian missionaries, in an effort to convert the Greeks, adapted existing beliefs and imagery to suit their own narrative. The resemblance between the iconography of the Christian devil and the god Pan was not merely a coincidence or artistic inspiration, but rather a deliberate process of demonizing the goat deity. Witches were believed to worship the devil and make pacts with him, and thus the goat imagery became associated with witches as well. Goats were regarded as highly virile and sexually potent animals, and this association with fertility and sexuality aligned with the perceived dark and sensual powers attributed to witches. The Malleus Maleficarium, a seminal work published in 1486, profoundly influenced the perception of witches as inherently evil women in Germany. This influential text laid the groundwork for a widespread consensus that shaped attitudes and beliefs about witchcraft. The Malleus Maleficarium's impact can be attributed to several factors. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century facilitated its rapid dissemination throughout Europe. This technological advancement allowed for the mass production of books, making the Malleus Maleficarium accessible to a broader audience. Moreover, the late 15th century was a significant period of religious turmoil. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther in 1517, challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and sparked religious conflict across Europe. The Malleus Maleficarum capitalized on the heightened religious tension of the era. It aligned with the prevailing fears and prejudices of both Protestant and Catholic reformers, who sought to maintain the purity of their respective faiths. The Malleus Maleficarum presented a distorted and misogynistic view of women, portraying them as inherently susceptible to witchcraft. It argued that women's weaker nature made them more prone to the temptations of the devil, and that they possessed a unique ability to harm others through magical practices. This portrayal of women as inherently evil contributed to the widespread persecution of suspected witches, particularly during the infamous witch craze that swept across Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Malleus Maleficarum's influence extended beyond Germany. Its idea resonated with religious and secular authorities throughout Europe, shaping legal codes and judiciary practices related to witchcraft. The Malleus Maleficarum served as a guidebook for witch hunters, providing a framework for identifying, interrogating, and punishing accused witches. Its enduring influence contributed to the tragic persecution and execution of countless innocent individuals, primarily women who were falsely accused of witchcraft. The Malleus Maleficarum's legacy remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of intolerance, superstition, and the scapegoating of marginalized groups in society. It underscores the importance of critical thinking and the rejection of unfounded beliefs and prejudices that can lead to devastating consequences. In a time when accusations of witchcraft were a tangible and imminent threat, Thomason's life hangs in the balance. It is not a surprise that Thomason would accuse the twins instead. Her desperation and suspicion of them created doubt with William. Conflicted, William drags Thomason back into the house to confront the twins. Catherine does not want Thomason in the house, but William insists that Thomason tell Catherine who Thomason believes is the cause of all this chaos. Thomason names Jonas and Mercy, who are in a strange slumber. William angrily shouts at them to wake, but they remain asleep. At his limit, William calls them all pretenders, viewing his children as demons. Catherine begins to grow hysterical, believing that the entire family is damned. William is now in full fury and frenzy. He wants to kill Jonas like Abraham would have done to his son Isaac. He calls out, quote, "Fetch the billhook, wife, and I will smite Jonas as Abraham would have done with his seed. Fetch the billhook, and I will dash his skull." This will foreshadow the death of another family member later in the film. In the Old Testament, God promised a son to Abraham and Sarah, so Isaac was born. Subsequently, to test Abraham's obedience, God commanded him to offer the boy as a sacrifice. Abraham prepared for the ritual, but at the last moment, God spared Isaac. William, in his religious frenzy, is willing to kill Jonas. As he picks Jonas up, the twins wake and begin to scream. In a state of uncertainty, William secludes Thomason, Jonas, and Mercy within the goat pen, isolating them alongside the goats. In confinement, the siblings engage in a dialogue, questioning each other about the potential involvement of witchcraft. However, only Thomason explicitly says that she is not a witch. As Black Phillip looks on, Thomason questions the twins about their ability to talk to him. However, the twins remain silent, leaving her question unanswered. William and Catherine bury Caleb near a tree. As William goes to cover dirt over Caleb, Catherine descends into the grave to lay alongside her dead son. With a piercing gaze, William found himself on the receiving end of her accusatory stare, laden with resentment. Frustrated and not knowing what to do, William resorts to chopping wood throughout the night. As mentioned before, Puritans believed in hard labor as a sign of virtuous living, but his wood chopping brings him no relief and he emotionally breaks down. He confesses to God that all this has been his fault. His pride has led the family into chaos, and he begs for mercy on his children. He asked God for his children's redemption, saying, quote, "Dispose of me how you wilt, yet redeem my children. They cannot tame their natural evil." He continues his plea, begging God for forgiveness, saying, quote, "I lie before thee, a coward and thine enemy, and I'll lick the dust off of thine earth." William proceeds to shove dirt in his mouth as a form of penitence. "I beg thee, save my children. I beg thee, my Christ. I have not damned my family." Unfortunately for the family, there would be no salvation, and the night would only descend into further chaos. Sometime later in the night, Catherine wakes in the house. She goes to light a candle, but it seems like she's in a trance. Her silver chalice is seen, impossibly returned to her. In another corner of the room, Caleb appears, holding baby Samuel. Catherine is ecstatic to see them and wants to wake William, but Caleb, in a strange whispering voice, tells her to let him sleep. Meanwhile, in the goat pen, the twins hear the rustling of an intruder. There is a thud that sounds like someone landing on the roof, then sounds of running right outside the pen. Back in the house, Catherine, still in a euphoric trance, is speaking to quote-unquote Caleb. He asks if she would like to see them often, to which she says that she would, and then he tells her that he wants her to look at a book. But before she can, her attention is diverted to baby Samuel, who is cooing in her arms. Catherine disrobes to breastfeed him. Back in the pen, the twins find the witch in the dark, feeding on the nanny goat's milk. Suddenly, the witch turns to face them, cackling loudly. The twins scream, waking Thomasin, who too screams in fear. Now, this is a very mind-bending sequence, and a lot is not shown but can be heard. There is a close-up shot of Thomasin's face as she screams. Loud footsteps can be heard, and it sounds like the witch running towards the twins. Then there is a loud choking sound, along with wet viscera noises. Thomasin looks towards the direction of the twins and continues to scream as if she's seen something horrific. Back in the house, Catherine is seen laughing hysterically as a raven pecks at her breast. She's holding her arms out as if she's breastfeeding, but there is no baby, only the raven that feasts upon her flesh. The scene ends with Catherine sighing contentedly. So another scene with a lot going on, but I believe that the witch has sent her familiar in the form of a raven to bewitch Catherine. Caleb mentions a raven during his deathbed speech. I think this is the same raven. Catherine is tempted by a vision of everything she longs for, her silver chalice, Caleb, and baby Samuel. This raven in the guise of Samuel and Caleb seems to try to tempt her to look at a book. Now I think this is the Devil's Book, which I briefly mentioned earlier in the video. So it appears the raven is trying to get Catherine to sign her name in Black Phillip's book in exchange for Caleb, Samuel, and the Lost Chalice. However, these are all false promises and lies. It is unclear if Catherine does sign the book. It is never shown if she does or doesn't sign it. But I do believe that this thematically is further strengthening the idea that Catherine is now rejecting God. What happens in the goat pen, I believe, is the witch attacking and eating Jonas and Mercy. Listening to the sound editing and seeing Thomasin's reaction really hints at this. Another thing I want to point out is that it is no coincidence that the witch is feeding on the nanny goat by sucking at the goat's teats, while her familiar, the raven, is doing something similar with Catherine inside the house. I think this just further links the raven to the witch as extensions of one another, almost as if they are the same. The next morning, William rises. Catherine is also awake, but remains in bed. Blood from her breast can be seen seeping into her blouse, meaning that experience with the raven was not a dream or an illusion. William goes to check on the children, only to be greeted by a strange and horrific sight. The goat pen is destroyed, with the front side being completely torn open from the inside. Thomasin is unconscious, and 2 dead young goats lay nearby. I think these young goats represent Jonas and Mercy, further hinting that they are in fact dead. What adds to this theory is that a young goat is called a kid, so 2 young goats, or 2 kids, are dead. Also, I want to go back to a previous scene where Thomasin threatens Mercy by the brook. Thomasin says, quote, "How I crave to sink my teeth into thy pink flesh." This is an idle threat from Thomasin, but I think it once again foreshadows what the witch has done to the twins. The witch most likely ate them by tearing their flesh apart with her teeth. We see the dead young goats torn apart in the same manner. Thomasin wakes and looks to her father. Before either of them can react, Black Phillip gores William in his side. William is fatally wounded, but manages to get a hold of his axe. But after a very brief moment, he seemingly accepts his fate and drops the axe, saying, quote, "Corruption, art my father." Black Phillip rams into William again, and William falls back into the pile of stacked wood. The firewood falls and buries his body. William now lays still and dead. The line, "Corruption, art my father," seems to be referencing the story of Job in the Bible again. Here's a quote from the story of Job in chapter 17. Quote, "If I wait, the grave is mine house. I have made my bed in the darkness. I have said to corruption, thou art my father. To the worm, thou art my mother and my sister. And where is now my hope? As for my hope, who shall see it? They shall go down to the bars of the pit, when our rest together is in the dust." This seems to further the connection between William and Job, or at least this is how William sees himself. He believes God is testing him, and here he has accepted his death and the corruption of his body. I think there's also a nice touch of payoff with the Black Phillip song, which foreshadowed William's death much earlier in the movie. Here are the lines. "Black Phillip has a mighty, mighty sting, he'll knock thee to the earth," and "he'll knock thee on thy back." William is knocked back into the firewood, and almost symbolically all his hard work of stacking the firewood comes falling over him, burying his corpse. The large stack of firewood was something that Thomasin had insulted William about, saying that was the only thing that he could do. So his death in this manner further heightens his inability to save his family. All his efforts were in vain, and his family was doomed due to his pride. Thomasin approaches her father's body, but before she can reach it, Catherine forcibly grabs Thomasin by her hair, roughly pulling her away. Catherine demands to know the whereabouts of Mercy and Jonas. Before she notices blood on Thomasin's hands, she accuses Thomasin of killing the twins. Catherine is indeed right about Thomasin having literal blood on her hands. You could see it as she approaches William. So my theory is that the witch probably rubbed the twins' blood on Thomasin when she was unconscious. This was probably done to further the discord between Thomasin and Catherine, and leads to the final confrontation. Catherine accuses Thomasin of being a witch and a seductress. Catherine believes Thomasin was trying to seduce and bewitch Caleb and William. Thomasin tries to reason with her, but Catherine is in a state of hysteria and attacks Thomasin. Both are now on the ground, with Catherine smacking Thomasin with blows to the head. Thomasin professes her love to her mother, but Catherine cannot be reasoned with. To defend herself, Thomasin grabs a billhook nearby and hits her mother over the head with it. This causes a gash in Catherine's head, but instead of stopping the fight, it further enrages Catherine, who begins to strangle Thomasin. In fear and desperation, Thomasin begins to strike her mother over and over again with the billhook, killing her. Thomasin sobs and hugs her dead mother's corpse before pushing it aside. This scene was foreshadowed earlier in the film when William threatened to kill Jonas with the billhook. William says, quote, "Fetch me the billhook, wife, and I will smite Jonas as Abraham would have done with his seed. Fetch me the billhook, and I will dash his skull." Thomasin did just that. Thomasin dashed Catherine's skull with the billhook. So, in a complete reversal from what William wanted to do, instead of a father killing a son, as Abraham would have done to Isaac, this scenario is a daughter who kills her mother. I don't think this is a coincidence. The events play out so perfectly that I suspect this is Black Phillip's design, a perversion or an inversion of the biblical story. Covered in the blood of her siblings and mother, Thomasin is left alone and in shock. Not knowing what to do, she enters the house. She removes her bloodied clothes and wraps herself in a blanket before falling asleep on the table. At nightfall, the sound of chimes wakes Thomasin from her sleep. She goes outside to see Black Phillip waiting for her by the goat pen. He enters the pen and Thomasin follows. Thomasin asks Black Phillip to speak to her as he would speak to the twins. There's a silent pause before he begins to talk, asking, quote, "What dost thou want?" Thomasin asks what he can give her, to which he responds, quote, "Would thou like the taste of butter? A pretty dress? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?" Thomasin responds with a yes, but Black Phillip continues, "Wouldst thou like to see the world?" Thomasin asks what he demands in return, to which he asks her if she sees a book before her. Thomasin looks down and sees a book on the ground. It seems to have a list of names, and the design, from what I can see, reminds me of an illuminated manuscript. Illuminated manuscripts were handwritten books that were often embellished with borders, illustrations, and decorated with valuable metals such as gold and silver. While religious themes are common in these artworks, not all of them are strictly religious. This appears to be Black Phillip's illuminated manuscript, an unholy book containing the names of all the women who have signed a covenant with him to become witches. There is a fantastic shot here that I love. It is blurry, but notice here that Black Phillip's goat hooves appear in one corner of the shot. But as he takes his second step, his hooves have turned into black boots with spurs. Black Phillip has transformed into a man dressed in black and shrouded in shadow. He tells Thomasin to remove her shift as he stands close behind her. His facial features remain largely obscured, but he appears to have adopted the physical form of a tall and attractive man. Thomasin sheds a tear as she contemplates signing the book. Black Phillip grips her shoulder and leans in close to her left, a literal devil on her shoulder. Thomasin tells him that she does not know how to write her name, to which Black Phillip tells her that he would guide her hand. The movie cuts to Thomasin naked and walking towards the woods, with Black Phillip once again in his goat form following not far behind. He leads her deeper into the dense woods. On a small hill nearby, a group of naked witches can be seen, writhing and chanting by the fire as Black Phillip watches over them. The witches chant in unison, in loud guttural noises. Lit just by moonlight and the bonfire, their naked bodies move and twist with an animalistic grace. The witches seem to vary in age. We do see the old witch that has been terrorizing Thomasin's family, along with 5 other witches. So in total I count 6 witches by the fire. Thomasin slowly approaches in awe at the sight. The chanting stops, and suddenly the 6 witches begin to float, some witches on their flying sticks, and some seem to float without it. It appears that they have performed another levitating ritual, but I think this time as a ceremony to welcome Thomasin into their ranks. There is a close-up of Thomasin, and she is smiling in delight with tears in her eyes. She seems to be in rapturous delight, but also in anguish. Her facial expressions is a mixture of joy and pain. Thomasin slowly floats high up into the air, joining the other witches, making her the 7th witch. In many cultures and religions, the number 7 holds deep significance. In the Bible, it is particularly associated with themes of completion and perfection. The book of Genesis narrates that God took 6 days to create the heavens and the earth, resting on the 7th day, symbolizing the completion of creation. I wonder if this is Black Phillip's completion of his goal of recruiting 7 witches for his coven. So here's my final thoughts and interpretation of the story. I think that Black Phillip's goal all along has been the corruption of Thomasin. Each horrific incident drives the family apart and in their isolation, they begin to turn on one another. Thomasin is especially targeted by her family members for being a witch. No one but Caleb would have taken her side, which is why I believe he was targeted right after Samuel. His closeness and support of Thomasin made him an obstacle, and his death really pushed the family into hysteria. By the end of the story, Thomasin is left as a sole survivor, and with nowhere else to turn to, she agrees to sign her name in Black Phillip's book. He promises her all these wonderful things that she desires, but will he even keep these promises? The witches certainly don't seem to be enjoying butter, wearing pretty dresses, or traveling the world. Despite her joyful laughter at the end of the story, Thomasin is not free. Just as she was repressed and bound to the law and social norms of her religious Puritan family and society at large, Thomasin is now bound to Black Phillip and his coven of witches. According to Puritan beliefs, she has sacrificed her eternal soul for earthly pleasures and is now damned. In the movie, the ideals and values of a colonial Puritan society are juxtaposed exquisitely. In stark contrast to the family's portrayal of industriousness, religious devotion, and humble society conduct, the witches are depicted as primal creatures who revel in violence and indulge in immoral behavior. The sentiments and fears prevalent during the era were deeply rooted in the misogynistic beliefs of the time. It was widely held that women were more vulnerable to demonic temptations due to their perceived weakness and susceptibility to carnality compared to men. At the time, the Malleus Maleficarium had a significant influence, which contributed to the prevalence of these views. In a time when fear of evil and damnation loomed, the narrative of the witch reflected the palpable anxieties of the era. This pervasive fear bred paranoia and suspicion, leading people to doubt their neighbors, close friends, and even family members. Thomasin's family homestead becomes a microcosm in the midst of a witch hunt. In times of misfortune or inexplicable occurrences, the most vulnerable members of society, namely young women, often bore the brunt of the accusations and blame. As Thomasin transitioned into adolescence, the way other people perceived her underwent significant change, leading to skepticism and doubt about her credibility. Through no fault of her own, her transition into womanhood made her susceptible to suspicion and scorn, transforming her from a regular girl into an object of doubt, desire, and derision. It is no wonder that Thomasin signs Black Phillip's book. Driven by societal fear and hatred towards evildoers, Thomasin, the protagonist of the story, was left with no alternative but to embrace her fate as the very embodiment of what they abhorred. Society's prejudice transformed her into the very thing they vehemently opposed, the witch. The movie ends with some text that reads, "This film was inspired by many folk tales, fairy tales, and written accounts of historical witchcraft, including journals, diaries, and court records. Much of the dialogue comes directly from these period sources." I touched on as many references to some of these period sources and inspiration that I could find, but I'm sure there are so many that I have left out, so if you'd like to add to this discussion, please leave it in the comment section down below. This is such a wonderful movie that has so many references to the real world. It also can be viewed in so many different ways and interpretations. I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you interpreted the movie down below. Again, if you enjoyed the video, please sacrifice a like or consider signing your name in my book by hitting the subscribe button. We must best try to appease the YouTube gods. Until next time, don't forget to live deliciously.